that messaging of to be confident, you have to be the loudest person in the room and you have to have this really extroverted personality isn't true. I think, as we all know, confidence is something that comes from within you, and developing that self-confidence of really loving who you are and feeling like you can truly be your authentic self no matter where you are is really what confidence means.
Welcome to the BehindTheNetra podcast, where we interview inspiring British Asians from all different fields about their success and how they got there. Today we have with us Jaspreet Kaur, who's a spoken word poet, a teacher, and the author of Brown Girls Like Me. Say hi to everyone.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for having me.
So your story is really interesting, and obviously you've written about it, and you got a book about it, so it proves that it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But for the people who aren't aware of your book or what it's about, can you tell us, when you were growing up, did you ever think you'd get to where you are today?
That's a great place to start. I definitely wouldn't have thought I would have got to where I am today or be the woman that I am today. I think if I look back to definitely like teenage Jaspreet, 13, 14 years old, I was a really shy, geeky, introverted young teenager. Definitely still am. I think there's elements of me that still hold parts of my personality is still that person. But I really did not have much self-confidence at that age. And I was pretty badly bullied at the start of secondary school. I think that really impacted my confidence. I didn't know where I fit into the world at that time. And I grew up in East London. I'm a proud East Londoner, a very multicultural, diverse part of the UK. But I don't feel I saw myself anywhere being represented, and I think that really had an impact on my self-confidence as well. So if you told me back then that I would have been a published author, a business owner, an educator, doing the work that I do now, I would have never believed you. I would have been like, nah, you're crazy. No, that's never going to happen. That's not me. That's not my life trajectory. So yeah, I think I've surprised myself over the years of what I've been able to do and achieve.
So quite similar, because you actually grew up quite near me. So I went to a school around the corner.
Which school did you go to?
I went to Ilford County.
So
you're Bill, right? Just around the corner, yeah.
Bill.
So a lot of my people from I went to primary school with all went to that same school as well. And it's what you talk about there as well. It's a lot of people who grew up in that kind of area. Like you said, we didn't really have those role models. You mentioned too about being introverted. And how much of that do you think was like due to the bullying and side of things, or what kind of came first? And also just showing, like, so many people listening now might think, oh, I'm too introverted to go and do something. But it's cool to see people like you who've said, like, oh, I was bullied, I was introverted, but you've now turned that around and you've gained that confidence.
Yeah. And
it shows that it is possible.
Yeah, and you can still be an introvert by personality and still be a confident person. And I think hopefully that's what through the work that I've done, and I do a lot of work in schools and with young people and showing them that you can still have that personality and be a confident person. And I think that messaging of to be confident, you have to be the loudest person in the room and you have to have this really extroverted personality isn't true. I think, as we all know, confidence is something that comes from within you, and developing that self-confidence of really loving who you are and feeling like you can truly be your authentic self no matter where you are is really what confidence means. So yeah, I think I've really challenged that over the years. And I think even for myself, I thought I had to be more extroverted and have this kind of personality to be confident, but I had to even challenge that kind of mindset in myself. And just kind of coming back to growing up where we did, you're absolutely right. I think other than the women in my family or people that I saw in my close vicinity, I didn't have the role models that I really needed outside of that. And what I mean by that is kind of in mainstream media, on TV and films and books, I couldn't see people like ourselves being represented. So yeah, I think role models play a really important role in developing that self-confidence of, I'm a big believer that you need to see it to believe it, to see something is possible. And as we all know, we were all encouraged to go down those traditional career paths of doctor, dentist, lawyer, accountant, teacher, yeah, which is one of the areas that I did go into. But anything outside of that didn't even seem possible at that time.
Where did you gain the confidence from? Like, what was that journey?
I guess kind of coming from that teenage self who was very shy, very anxious, and I'm very open about the fact that I used to suffer from anxiety and panic attacks. Even in my early 20s, suffered from depression, and really had to figure out ways and tools work around that and support my well-being. And growing up in quite a traditional Punjabi family, back then we just didn't talk about mental health, which is a very different story now.
Which is great, right? It's really good how the community is changing.
Yeah, much more open to it and really tackling that stigma, but it has been quite a journey. So back then, I just didn't talk to anybody about these feelings that I was holding in and bottling in. Didn't speak to family, friends, teachers about anything I was going through. So I turned to writing. I turned to specifically poetry as my outlet to let out all those emotions that I was bottling in. And I would write poems and journal and short stories to let out all those feelings and emotions. And I continued that for a number of years into my early 20s. Never shared it with anybody. This was just something I was holding on to and doing for myself. But I think that helped me develop the confidence over the years of not holding those emotions inside and actually releasing them out of myself onto the page. And that really helped me kind of develop that confidence over the years.
And then you went into teaching as well, right? And when you're talking about teaching, obviously you're standing in front of a class full of kids. So you need quite a lot of confidence to do that. And I think sometimes people don't necessarily appreciate that enough.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm a secondary school teacher as well. So I'm standing in front of teenagers from age 11 to 18. And as we all know, at that age, easily distracted. If they're not engaged, if it's a topic, they're like, I'm not interested in this. Or if you're just not an engaging person for them, they'll switch off and they'll want to disengage. But thankfully, I had a really inspiring teacher growing up. Her name was Miss McCarthy. She was my sociology teacher. I still speak to her till this day. She's still a mentor to me till this day. And she really did change my life growing up. So she's actually the person who probably encouraged me and inspired me to go into teaching. So after I did my undergrad in history, I did a postgraduate degree in gender studies and sociology, and then went into teacher training. And I did something similar to Teach First, where they chuck you into a classroom on day one and you just got to find your feet and figure it out. And as a young South Asian woman, you can imagine stepping into that classroom, I really had to think, if I don't own it from day one, they're going to eat me alive. Because we all know how we were with new teachers, with substitute teachers. So I really had to step into that room and really find my voice. And what I mean by that is own who I was. And I knew that if I was relatable and approachable to my students, that will help. But I also need to remain a level of being strict and for them to respect me as well, and balancing those two things. And I was teaching history, which, as we all know, historically is seen as a boring subject and not the most engaging subject. And if you think about all the history teachers you might have had growing up, they definitely did not look like me. So if anything, I tried to use that to my benefit of I'm bringing something different to the classroom and I'm bringing something different to the table. So I think I had to bring that confidence from day one, because if I didn't, I'd probably get eaten alive. And thankfully it worked. And I had a really brilliant teaching career. And even though I've left the classroom in some capacity now, I do miss it. And I did end up helping young people feel engaged in the history curriculum and in the topic of history. I've now had students who have gone on to study history at university and become teachers themselves, which makes me feel really old. I'm like, oh my God. But yeah, that I think pushing myself and taking that leap of faith in myself from day one of I've really got to do this and challenge myself is what's going to help me be the best teacher I can be as well. And
then you're still writing on the side, right? Mm-hmm. So at the time you're working full-time in teaching, writing for yourself, and you weren't sharing at that point. Where did you start sharing it first? Was it with your students, or where did that kind of come about? How did you just get the confidence to put your words out there?
Yeah. So how did I become then I was calling it teacher by day, poet by night? So the trigger moment for when I started sharing the poetry was around the same time. I'd just finished my master's in gender studies and sociology, and I'd written a thesis, a research paper on a really heavy topic, but it was on female infanticide. And it was looking at the ongoing son preference in South Asian communities. And why is it that we prefer to have a son over a daughter? And how has that impacted us economically, socially, culturally? I was mainly focusing on South Asia and specifically on Punjab, where my family are from. And why did that have some of the highest rates of female infanticide, sex-selective abortions, girls going missing? And when I was doing the research on this, some of the statistics were really harrowing. And the fact that the UN Population Fund had estimated, because of this ongoing son preference and preferring to have a boy over a girl, is resulted in 140 million missing girls. And when I saw that number, I was like, that's twice the size of the UK population. That is harrowing. That is, how do we not all know this? How is this not something that's like more well known? And I finished that research paper, finished the thesis. I was working with a few great charities that are tackling the work in this space. But I was like, how do I get this message further? How do I get this to reach more people? So I actually combined that research and summarized it into a spoken word poem, because I was like, I've been doing this for years, writing poetry for years. Let me just summarize it into a short spoken word piece. And I just plucked up the courage to go to a poetry and arts night happening in Hounslow in West London. And I was like, I'm from East London. No one knows me there. If this goes terribly wrong, I'm just going to run back home and never do it again. So I felt like, in a way, I had nothing to lose. So I went to this poetry night and performed this poem, which was called Queens and Corpses. And what happened was an audience member was filming it. And the next day I woke up and saw the video had gone viral across the UK, North America, Canada, India, Australia. I was getting emails and messages from people around the globe. And then I could also see on that day the impact it had on the audience in the room. And everybody was saying, thank you so much for talking about this issue. I want to do something about it. And that's when I recognized that poetry can be a really accessible way to talk about some of these difficult topics, taboo issues, but can also be used as a tool for social change. And I kept going from there. That was day one. And the poetry journey continued to where I am now.
I think it's always one of those dark secrets, right, about the Punjabi community with the infanticide. And I guess it's one of those topics where people don't like to bring up, because obviously it is such a dark, morbid topic. But it's so important for us to acknowledge that it's happening.
Yeah. And
I haven't seen stats recently, but I hope it is getting better.
But I wanted to emphasize that this wasn't just a faraway issue happening in the Eastern world. This is definitely still something that's happening in the Western world too. And what it looks like in our homes, even here in the UK, is that, for example, when somebody's pregnant and about to have a child, being asked lots of questions about the gender of the baby, making assumptions that it should be a boy if it's their first child. I've even heard people being told when they've had a baby and it's a baby girl, oh, don't worry, you can try for a boy next time. And I think that's the kind of language and sentiment that we're still seeing, even here in the UK and the Western world. So it was trying to challenge some of those mindsets, challenge that language, and not just see it as a faraway problem, that this is something that's happening in our own homes as well.
Yeah, and I think what's really great about, say, maybe the last 10, 15 years is how many like British Asian women are really emerging and getting that confidence to like take a stand. And I think this is the way you change opinions, right, is by standing up. And obviously men are doing it as well, but just seeing so many like young women going out and be like, yeah, I can say what I think and I can make a change the way people's perceptions are. And I think that's really helped the community. Especially with mental health is another area where I think it's really changed.
Yeah.
By people who are getting the platforms like what we've got today and talking about these kind of issues so people know about them. Because it's very easy to kind of hide this stuff away, like, oh yeah, don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But then it's affecting real people and real people's lives. And like I said, there's all these missing women now who could have had like such amazing, fulfilling lives.
Yeah.
And we don't find out about them. And yeah, it's tough. But going from that, so you're doing the spoken word poetry.
Yeah.
And then obviously you were talking about lots of different topics. And how did that then translate into like going into your book? Like what was that journey from one poem that you spoke out loud to then publishing a book and doing a book tour and all of that, all of the success you've had now?
I guess what then led this book to really existing and coming from an idea to fruition and actually getting published and out there into the world is a combination of all those things. And I really do say this is the book I always wished existed. It was the book I wished I had as teenage, shy, anxious Jaspreet. This was the book that she needed. As I went into my academic field, feeling like South Asian women were being ignored in those spaces too. feeling like what I mentioned before of not seeing us represented in the mainstream, in mainstream media anywhere. And sadly, when I did see South Asian women being represented anywhere, we were still seeing these really outdated stereotypes about Asian women being shy and submissive and weak and docile. And I was just so tired of that narrative of where are the stories of achievement and resilience and overcoming struggle and the amazing, strong South Asian women that I know and I see, where are their stories? And then when I was in the classroom as an educator, I could see that South Asian girls are academically doing really well. We're some of the smartest in the country. We follow closely behind Chinese boys and girls at every academic level. So at GCSEs, A-levels, the number of undergraduate degrees are increasing, postgraduate degrees are increasing, and that's amazing. But why was it that in the classroom, I could see Asian girls were the least likely to put their hands up in class? They were the least likely to put themselves forward for kind of prestigious school roles. And then I could see this at university, and we know we can see this in the workplace as well, that Asian women feel that it can't be their fullest selves in the workplace. And I couldn't understand, why is this all still happening today? And that was what the book really wanted to look at, to challenge some of these existing narratives, but also just be a guidebook and a manifesto for South Asian women, for us to tell our stories from our own voice. So I began some of that research from when I finished my master's in gender studies, whilst I was teaching in the classroom and doing the poetry and doing the spoken word. I started doing some of that research in the background. And I began interviewing Asian women as well. So I spoke to around 150 Asian women from across the country to collate their stories into this book. And I started molding that all together. And then it was the question of, well, how do I get this book out there? How do I get it published? Like, I've not got any authors or writers in my family or in my close vicinity, so I don't know what that process is. So we really then started researching, okay, so how do you get published? There's a number of different routes. You can self-publish, crowdfunding, but I really wanted to take the traditional route of finding a publishing house, getting it published by them, and wanting this in bookstores around the country, because I feel it really deserved that, and to do this story justice and to do justice for South Asian women, I wanted to see it in bookshelves, in Waterstones and W.H. Smiths and the likes. So it was then finding a literary agent, which was kind of the first step into the literary world. Just like actors and movie stars have an agent who gets them into movies, it's the same thing for writers. So I started to just reach out to literary agents, and it was literally Google research into what are literary agents, who are they, the number of different ones across the UK and across the world. Started reaching out to them with this idea. And thankfully, lots of them were coming back and saying, you're absolutely right, a book like this needs to exist. Did
that surprise you at all? Like, did you expect, what was your expectation? Do you think people would come back positively? Or were you expecting a bit of bias, or people being like, oh, this isn't important? What were you expecting?
I was expecting mixed emotions, I guess. And we did receive some of that. And I should emphasize that even though I was lucky enough to find a great literary agent, there were rejections too. There were people saying a book like this isn't really needed, or being told, I already represent an Asian female writer, I don't want another one, as if there can only be one, which was frustrating. So I think I did expect some of that rejection and some of that animosity, or some of that kind of not sure. I also had a bit of that imposter syndrome of, am I even a writer? Like questioning that. I was like, I know I'm an educator and I know I write poetry, but writing a non-fiction book like this, I was kind of like doubting myself a little bit. So yeah, we did get those mixed responses, and I think I kind of expected that too. I don't think I was naive in thinking that it's going to be like, yes, straight away, and this is going to be a really easy journey. I knew it was going to be a bit of an uphill battle. Also from kind of what I could see more widely in the publishing world about the fact that there's so little Black and Asian authors being published and Black and Asian books out there, that I knew this was going to be a bit of an uphill battle.
Yeah, and a few things you mentioned as well, which I just want to highlight to the audience, is that like, if you do know any South Asian women who you think are doing incredibly well, like reach out to us so we can interview them and we can share their stories as well. We can give them a platform. And then also with the book side, so part of what I do is what I do of ghostwriting. So I've done book proposals to people, and I've got the different agents there as well. So if you are struggling to try and get some connections there, like you can contact me and I can try and help you. I'm sure you'd want to help them as well. So there are people who have done this like in our community. And if you reach out to them, some of them will try and help you.
Yeah.
And it might not always work out, but like I said, unless you try, you never know. And you might find that your story really resonates with somebody.
Yeah.
And then you can get out there and then you can have your books on shelves as well.
Yeah.
With the actual like writing the book process, did you have the finished book already ready before you reached out to literary agents?
No, it wasn't finished when I reached out to literary agents. At that point, it was still in research stage. I did have the ideas of what the book was going to look like, what chapters were going to be in there, the structure of the book. So I was quite strong on knowing the structure of it. And when we were putting that proposal and pitch together, I kind of already saw it. But it wasn't finished. It still needed another 2 years after getting signed for it to be completely done. So if you are thinking of writing a book, no, it doesn't actually have to be fully completed.
And I think that's a huge misconception because a lot of people I hear who want to write a book, they think they've got to just write it.
Yeah.
Whereas everything I've done, like what you did as well, you write the proposal first.
Yeah.
You get that airtight, you get that really strong in the concept.
Yeah.
And then once you start writing and you've got a deal, they'll have editors who will help you out as well.
Yeah.
So you don't need to do it all alone, which I think sometimes people think, I need to just write this book on Microsoft Word for like 10, 15 years, and then I try and get an agent. Like, you don't need to do that. Like, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Put anybody off. Oh my God, that thought of like, I'm going to sit here and write this entire book. And you may, like myself, still be in a full-time job, still be in a part-time job, doing other multiple things, have other roles in your life. And you're like, when do I have the time to write this entire book? So don't let that put you off. If you've got the idea, and like you said, you've really got that concept strong, and not to sound like Simon Sinek, but you've really got your why strong of why you're writing this book, what is the purpose behind it. And I was very strong on that. I knew why it needed to exist. I knew why I was writing it and the purpose and the audience, and I knew who it was going to help. So I was very strong on that. So as long as you've really spent the time to work on that, that's enough to take you forward. And since writing the book, I've spoken to a number of other South Asian women. Actually, 2-3 of them are now in the works of getting their books published or have had them published. So I'm absolutely happy to give anybody advice on what I've done and my journey, because like I said, I came from a working class ethnic minority background from East London, had no authors and writers in my close vicinity. So I just kind of had to figure out that journey, and any of that knowledge I can share with anybody else, I'd be more than happy to provide that advice.
Yeah, and with the book itself, so obviously you've been doing a book tour, you've got another university book tour coming up, but is there anything that you think you don't get to speak about enough, that an idea in the book that you really love, but people don't ask you about, or you don't feel like gets enough attention, that you can like highlight for us today?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's done a lot of the work I really hoped it had. And when I wrote this book, and we call it the Essential Guidebook and Manifesto for South Asian Girls and Women, and I really do see it as a manifesto, which sounds like a very politically heavy word, but I do see it as a movement for South Asian girls and women. And I definitely feel that movement has started this year since the book's come out, and those that have read it and been a part of the movement have felt it too. But I guess the area and the concepts in the book that I guess I wish had a bit more focus. The one side of it of how much academic research went into this book, I think sometimes gets missed a little bit. And as an academic and as an educator, I'm like, there's a lot of research and time that went into this book. And I think the reason behind that is I think a lot of people see it and might assume it's an autobiography, which it's not. It does have a little bit of my narrative in there and anecdotes from my own life in there, which I wanted to include. But there's a lot of academic research that went into this book. And I'm currently a research fellow at the University of Birkbeck with their politics department. And what that meant was I had access to a number of resources and libraries and archives and data and statistics that I felt people hadn't seen about South Asian women. So that's really interwoven into this book. So sometimes that gets missed a little bit. So I want people to really look at some of that data and recognize that research behind it. But I guess one of the topic areas that I feel may have not got enough focus yet is perhaps the last chapter of this book. It's called Power in the Digital Age. And it's looking at the idea of how in this kind of post-2020 world, I couldn't write this book without looking at the impact of digital media and social media and how that's impacted South Asian women's identity, both positively and negatively. positively, because social media has been a great place for South Asian women to find their voice, to share and talk about issues that concern them as a form of activism, as a form of networking and finding solidarity with other people. So that's been kind of a brilliant tool for that, and something that South Asian women haven't had historically. But I think the negative side of it is obviously the impact on our well-being, our mental health, and sometimes the digital space isn't a safe space for women of colour. So I think that chapter is a really interesting one, a really current issue. And I feel like that particular topic hasn't got as much focus as I hoped it would have, especially because we are living in this digital age. And if anything, I want those conversations to continue, especially around how do women of colour like myself use the digital space safely going forward, using it as a tool for change or networking or solidarity or however you might use it, but making sure you're doing it safely. And looking after yourself in the meantime. So yeah, I think that doesn't get as much time as sometimes I hoped it would have.
One thing, so me and Gervir, like the co-founder of this, we were talking about is how we're almost jealous of South Asian women on social media in some ways, because we just see how much they support each other, right? And that's something which men don't tend to do to each other. Like you'll see like when somebody from a South Asian background, when they're a woman, you can see all of their friends really coming out and showing the support, and it's really nice to see. And it's really great, like there's that kind of community being built in by different people across different industries.
Yeah.
And sometimes men kind of don't do that to each other. It's like we're going to try and build that culture. Yeah, and it's one of the things we've been questioning. Why don't we do that? And I think it's this idea of many of us have, when we're growing up, this idea about being strong, or like you don't say comments because you don't want to be made fun of or whatever like that. And that stops sometimes people saying things in a social space where you're going to be fear of being judged, right? And I have that fear of judgment when I put stuff out there, because I know what I was like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, because I grew up in East London. The environment wasn't particularly, say, what's a good word for it? Tolerant of different ideas and different people. And if you're different, then you're weird or whatever like that.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have grown up in this idea of like, you keep in your lane. And what I find a lot is a lot of like men will message, like DM me, but you don't get as much of the public support sometimes. And that's what I want to try and change as well, because you can just see like there's so many South Asian women doing amazingly well on social media.
Yeah.
And they're all supporting each other, and it's really good to see. And even for like, say, people listening, like regardless of like if you're a man or woman, whatever you are, it's, you will find a tribe on social media sometimes.
Absolutely,
and there are the trolls, there are the people who put you down, but there's also a lot of people who will find you and connect with you based on what you're saying. And it's kind of, you have to have the courage sometimes to do that, and also find the support. So if you do have any problems, you've got your friends around you who can help you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think there's a number of reasons behind why that might be the case. And for South Asian women, we are seeing this growing sense of solidarity and sisterhood, and that is a beautiful thing. It might not always be the case. I think that sometimes that might come down to feeling like there's a lack of opportunity or there's a lack of space to have all of us taking up these different spaces and industries, but that is not the case. There is plenty of space for us all to be there. But yeah, there is that growing sense of sisterhood. And I think that was one of the most beautiful findings from this book. And I think for men, it may come from, you're right, some of these ideals of, growing up in East London, people weren't tolerant to different ideas. I definitely grew up in environments that had a lot of that kind of toxic masculinity of what it means to be a man, and not showing sometimes those more kind of emotional or compassionate parts of our personalities. And we need men doing that. We need men being more supportive and compassionate with one another. And we've seen what the negative side of what that looks like too. And we've seen how for South Asian men in our communities, how much their mental health has been impacted in recent years. We're seeing some of those really horrible figures of suicide rates increasing, men's mental health really suffering. But if we held space for being more supportive with one another, specifically for men to find supportive and compassionate communities, whether that's digitally on social media or in real life, I feel like that would really be helping South Asian men with their well-being too. So yeah, we need more men supporting one another, being compassionate with one another. And that doesn't make you any less of a man. And I think that's where men themselves really need to question, what does it mean to be a man? And historically, that might have been told you have to be this really hyper masculine person. But as we all know, that's not the case anymore. Being a man can be so many different things, and you can still hold space for compassion and love and those ideals too. Some of the most confident men that I know are the most compassionate, and they have communities and they support community and that concept of community, and they're probably the best men that I know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think so much of it is changing, where a big idea I think is coming across on social media now, especially among South Asian women, is about being like, you define yourself, right? And trying to break those stereotypes. And I feel like men are starting to do that as well, about being a man isn't like, there isn't a single definition of what that means. It's whatever it means to you, you be who you want to be. And it's an idea which I think is really being pushed well by a lot of female influencers and people in that space. And it's an idea that's like blurring the lines now a bit, and it's showing like whatever you want to do, as long as it's not hurting anybody else, you can do that, right? And you can show that and show leadership in that area. And you've done your tours and you're doing a university tour. I think it started, or it's going on at the moment,
It
right?
started, yeah. It started last week. Yeah.
And I guess it must be really good, because what you're doing is meeting people who've read the book or interested in your ideas. Have you had any stories from that are really touching, that have really mattered to you and made it all worth it, all the hard work in writing the book?
Oh yeah, definitely. So we had the national tour earlier this year, where we did regional events across the country, in London, in the Midlands, in the North, in Scotland, where I was meeting all the communities that we were really hoping this book would help. And then we just last week launched our national university tour. So I'm traveling to around 20 universities across the country, meeting young South Asian girls and women at university to talk about some of the topics and themes in this book. And yeah, I've had lots of women, girls and men who have read the book, and they've said it's made them feel like it's validated their voice. It's made them feel like they're not alone in their experiences. It's given them the tools and education to maybe make change in their own lives or in their own families and communities. And that's exactly what I was hoping the book would do. And I've had women telling me really inspiring stories, sometimes really emotionally moving ones, where sometimes I've just got to sit back and just kind of absorb it and take some time to absorb it, of women who have left abusive relationships and abusive marriages after reading this book, or women who have set up their own businesses and started a new career and started a new job because it's given them the confidence and the tools to do that. And for men, and whether that's South Asian men or men from outside of our community or allies from other communities, have read this book, and it's given them the tools of understanding the South Asian woman's experience. And they've said that it's given them the self-education to be a better ally to women of colour and what they can do better. So it's definitely done all of that. But I think one of the moments where it really struck me, and I think I'll hold on to this forever, is earlier this year on World Book Day, where students usually go into school, in primary school, and World Book Day, they'll dress up as their favourite character from a book or a story. And historically, everyone dresses up like Harry Potter or Matilda or one of the well-known books. And I was sent photos across social media of parents who sent photos of their children, specifically young South Asian girls, dressed up in their traditional salwar kameez or their traditional cultural wear, and a lenga or whatever their cultural clothes might be, with the black sunglasses, as the front cover is famously known for. And they went to school with Brown Girl Like Me. And that was so moving to me, because I thought, wow, for these young brown girls to feel the confidence to go to school in their cultural wear was something I would have never been able to do. Even growing up in East London, which we know was filled with Asians, I still wouldn't have done that. So for me to see that this book has given brown girls the confidence to be themselves, feel proud of their identity and their culture and their history and their heritage, was, so moving. I think that's a moment I'll hold on to for the rest of my life, of the impact this book has had on people.
And obviously, like, this is your first book. Have you got other books in the works, or what have you got? What's exciting for you at the moment, right? So you've got other projects going on. What's most exciting you? What should people be watching out for? What's coming from you in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'll emphasize is that from now being a business owner and an entrepreneur, it's not just the literary works that I'm developing. There's also the educational side and the training work that I do. So I provide online workshops and classes for corporate spaces, for schools, for universities. So that educational element of who I am is still developing. Even though I've now kind of stepped out of the classroom, I've kind of thought of how do I go beyond the classroom to educate. So that area of my work is definitely growing. In terms of the literary work that I do, there's definitely more books in the pipeline. I think any writer would say that they've got so many books that live within them. So it's about now thinking about the next stage of my books. The most obvious one is that lots of people have asked, where is the poetry? Because obviously this was my debut book and it was a non-fiction book. It does have some of my poems in there. Each of the chapters opens with a poem, but I think people are keen to see a collection of poetry. I definitely have more kind of feminist research that I want to explore around wider themes to do with feminism and women's rights. But I actually have a children's book coming out next year, which we'll be talking about very soon and launching very soon, which is a children's poetry book. So there's definitely lots still growing in the literary space. But I think by having these multiple roles as a poet, a teacher, an author, I used to think that I can only be one of them. I can only be one thing. I'm like, I can only just be a teacher, or maybe I can just be a poet, or I could just be an author. But now I've seen I can do all these multiple things and wear these multiple hats. And I think especially for women, often we're told we can only do one thing. Fit into that nice, neat box, have a safe career, get married, have children, is what everyone's expectation is of you. But I think now I've learned that I can do all these different things and they can all grow. Sometimes I'll focus more time in one area than another and let that kind of nourish and grow, and the others will kind of slow down until the time is right. So yeah, lots more books, pursuing more of education, and then just seeing what other areas and passions I want to explore as well. I think I'm always somebody that wants to learn and grow and develop new ideas and concepts. So I'm just kind of letting myself marinate in that as well.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And then obviously people can look out for what's coming up. But one thing you said there as well I found quite funny is, because we were talking about this just before we started recording, about how before we had our identity as what our job was, right? And then once you start opening up, then the problem is no longer about just keeping to one thing. It's like stopping yourself from doing a million different things.
Yeah, that's my problem.
And like your problem like flips around from like, oh, I'm only doing one thing and I'm really bored, to, okay, I do way too many things now. I need to stop doing so many things and focus. And you're going through the same thing, right, at the moment?
Yeah. I think sometimes that is my challenge of, I've got so many ideas and so many things I want to explore and try. And it's about sometimes just being patient with yourself and saying, okay, let me focus on this area. It's okay to put something to the side for a little while and let that marinate and pursue it later on. That's definitely something I've developed over the years of just having patience, that it doesn't all have to be right now, come up with this idea, it needs to come out today. Not everything works that way, and to have the patience around some of those ideas, and especially with the work that we do, this kind of idea of work-life balance, everything just molds into one. When I was an educator, when I was a teacher, I knew what my job was. I come home, I have holidays. It was a very clear routine.
I miss holidays.
Oh yeah, I know. Now it's just like, when is holidays? When does work finish? And really trying to switch off is sometimes a challenge for myself of, okay, let me switch off from all these work-related things and just take time for myself. And that's definitely where things like meditation and mindfulness, writing for just myself and not for work, going for long walks. I've got a big doggy, his name's Peter, and my husband and I taking for a good long walk every day, and just spending time with family and friends to really switch off from that work side of who I am. And also just kind of reminding myself that I think because we live in this environment now, especially with social media, of this kind of hustle culture and more, and what's your next thing? What's your next thing? What's your next thing? I think we just need to remind ourselves sometimes just to be content with where we are. And that's okay too. Just to say, you know what, everything I'm working on right now, this is great. I'm going to continue nourishing this and sit with where I'm at right now. And that's okay. It doesn't always have to be the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And unfortunately, this kind of capitalist culture encourages that behavior. So sometimes just kind of sit with where you are, feel centered with where you are, and say, this is okay. And being happy with that too.
Yeah. So we're in the final few minutes now. So I've got a few quick fire questions.
Sure.
So the first one is, you can shout out 3 people in one sentence each. Who would they be? So people that people listening should be following or paying attention to, or like learning about their work.
Amazing. Number 1 has to be my husband, Indy Hoti. He would be the first person I'd want to shout out. He's probably the greatest feminist that I know. And to be honest, the person that I am today, having this book out, the business that we co-run together, Behind The Netra, which is the media and training and arts production company we run, none of that would have existed without him. So that's a huge shout out to Indy Hoti and the incredible work that he does. The next person I'd want to shout out her name is Jaspreet Kaur. She runs an organization called Asian Women Mean Business. She's been a huge inspiration to me over the years. She's an incredibly kind, compassionate woman, but really champions South Asian women owned businesses. So do check her out on social media. And then the final one I think I'll shout out is probably a fellow poet and writer. She's a good friend of mine, and I'm trying to look at her work a lot more at the moment. Her name is Sana San. She's a poet, a psychologist and writer. And she's doing really incredible work in the mental health space, but looking at the lack of cultural sensitivity going on in the mental health space. And she's using academic research, but also poetry to really tackle some of those issues. So she's another person I'd like to mention. So
okay. And we really want to build community through this podcast and through the BHQ. So what are some of the people listening right now could maybe message you about that you might be able to help them with? So we've mentioned the book. Would it be around that area?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you are interested in entering the literary world and publishing a book, more than happy to support people on that. Definitely tips and advice in using writing for well-being. Obviously, I've shared a little bit about my journey of how I've used specifically poetry as a way to support my well-being. If anybody's interested in looking at creative arts and how that can support their mental health, then I'm happy to talk more about that. And also just ideas around, I get lots of women asking questions similar to the journey that I've been on of how do I go down an unconventional career path. They may want to leave their career that they're currently in that defines their identity, and they want to try and do something different, or they want to pursue a side hustle whilst they're still working, or they've got an idea that they're really passionate about. So if you want support and advice on that, absolutely more than happy to help with that. And usually my advice is, well, just start. Start, take that risk, take that leap of faith, because you won't know until you do start and do try, and then we'll know what it feels like. So yeah, happy to help anybody with those things.
And then on the flip side of that, what's something that you need help with right now that maybe somebody in our audience could help you with and reach out and teach you?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. There's lots of things I still want to grow and learn and understand. I think it's around that area of what we're talking about work-life balance, if there's such a thing, especially for women out there that maybe, like myself, business owners, but also have a family life. I do have a little one on the way, and now really thinking about what is this next stage going to look like for myself, because being self-employed, not getting maternity leave, all those sorts of ideas that people who do have other career paths might have. I'm now trying to figure out what is this next stage going to look like for myself? How do I still pursue the passions that I have, the work that I do, and feel fulfilled in that? But also starting this journey of motherhood, which I'm really excited for. Any advice and support in that area is definitely what I feel I need help with right now.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's been many people out there who've been through what you've been through and can help out. So it's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming on. Do you have any final words for the audience?
I guess my final words to the audience, just coming back to maybe going full circle to where we started. The final words I would leave people with is to always remember to be your truest self, your most authentic self, and to feel confident in that, even if that makes you different and weird and strange and not...
Especially if it makes you feel weird and strange.
Yeah, to really own that part of you, because that is what's going to make you special. That's what's going to make you different, and that's probably what's going to make you successful as well. So to be confident in that.